Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the TV show Troppo. Now, I've been really excited to talk about this show because the real reason why I wanted to watch the show is because I'm a huge fan of the actor Thomas Jane. I've been a fan of him ever since the movie Standard, which is a film that is actually based on a true story about a bank robber who was actually a cop but robbed banks during his lunch break. It's literally a true story in that regard. Phenomenal film, but because of that movie, I was a fan of him. And I've actually known about him as an actor well before that movie, from films he's done such as The Crow City of Angels, The Thin Red Line, among other things as well too. And I loved him as the Punisher. Now, I have not seen the Punisher in well over a decade, but I'm sure if I watch the film now, I'm not sure how the film will hold up for him, but I remember distinctly loving him as the Punisher, especially when I saw it in theaters. But the point I'm getting is that I've been a fan of him ever since 2003 because of the film Standard. And I really believe that Thomas Jane is one of the most underrated actors in the industry right now. And quite literally, he's in my top 10 favorite actors of all time, along the likes of Louis Mandylor, of course, Thomas Jane, and now some new actors that are in the top 10 for me, such as Tom Hallam, Adam Hampton, just to name a few. I think that Thomas Jane is one of those actors that you put him in anything and he's going to bring it 100%. There's going to be something about him that he's going to bring the film into at a whole nother level, whether the film is good or not, but having him in the film will definitely bring it up a notch or two, because I really think he's that strong of a performer in my opinion. So of course we're getting a TV show with him in the lead, and I was instantly hooked. And when I saw the trailer for the show, I immediately was hooked with the story. But a lot of it does have to do with the partnership that he has with the co-lead in Nicole Shamoon, who plays the character of Amanda, which I'll be getting into here as well, because there's a wonderful story that he happened to share about how he discovered Nicole along the way for the part of Amanda. So I'm not going to get into any spoilers with the show at all, because there's a lot of things that starts to unfold along the way that I was genuinely surprised with here when it came to a lot of these stories, the character's backstory here, that I thought was very fitting with you not knowing virtually anything about until you watch the show. So the less you know about what's going on, the better, outside of the plot synopsis, which I'll be revealing here. So no spoilers in this review, but I will get into the plot synopsis, my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. An eccentric private investigator with a criminal past recruits a disgraced ex-cop to help the disappearance of a Korean tech pioneer in the wilds of the far north Queensland. And that right there is the show in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with the show are with the two leads in Thomas Jane and Nicole Shamoon. They are the heartbeat of this show. They make the show that good. Of course, other things about the show, such as the other supporting characters in the show, the writing, the directing, cinematography, the set design, among other things as well too, certainly is top tier in my opinion. But really, it does have to do with these two actors, because when you learn about these characters' backstory, it's some really dark, heavy shit, and it's very, very complex along the way too, where the accusations that are thrown at these two characters, especially with the character of Amanda, who I'll reveal right here that she's accused, well, she served time in prison for murder. But when you learn about what had happened along the way, you start to question if certain things that are claimed about her for committing this crime, are they real, if that makes any sense. I'm sure when you watch the show you'll understand what I mean by that. But with Thomas Jane, on the other hand, without spoiling what his accusation is, but what he's accused of is something that you can never come back from at all. And that's the reason why because he was a detective out in Sydney, and he's an American playing a detective in Sydney, and has a wife and a kid. But this accusation that came about him, like I said before, there's no turning back from that. Once that's out there, you are scarred for life. So he did what he thought was best for his wife and daughter, to get away from them and go further up north, where apparently it does happen in real life, where some people who want to escape from certain things in their lives in the bigger cities, and they go further up north, which is like the equivalent of the South for us here in the United States. In Australia, if you go up north, it's a lot hotter, it's a lot more tropical in that sense. So it's not an easy environment to live in. So there's really not a whole lot of people that would want to live in that part of the country, which is why there's certain people who get away from more of the populated cities, go up further up north, because they're less likely to be interacting with other people who know them, if that makes any sense. So the fact that he made this decision to get away from his family to protect them in a lot of ways, it makes sense why he is up there. especially when you learn more about his backstory, which is some really sad things about these accusations that are made about him. And you come to find out they're not true at all, but it's such a complicated story that you definitely need the time to spend with the character to really understand where they're coming from and the choices they make along the way, why it makes sense, whether you agree with them or not, but you understand where they're coming from. And I think Thomas Jane does a phenomenal job in delivering one of his best performances, in my opinion, in the character of Ted Kankafy. Now, Nicole Shamoun is an actress I was not familiar with here at all. And the story is that Thomas had shared before is that he was going through the whole auditioning process to find who can be the best actress to play the character of Amanda. And because he was in the United States and all the actors were all in Australia, obviously there's a big time difference there. And he just didn't feel like he had the connection that he really needed to get from a lot of these actors, although he did say a lot of them were very good, but just couldn't find that connection that he felt was needed for this character. And he felt like there's just no way it's going to work out. And then lo and behold, we get Nicole on the way, who delivers this amazing performance in the audition where he figured out, holy shit, she's Amanda. And what I thought we couldn't get in getting the connection, the chemistry to work through a Zoom call, she delivered, and she delivered in all fronts. And right then and there, he realized that we found Amanda, and it shows on the screen because she delivers a top tier performance, in my opinion. And as a result of her performance in the show, I'm a fan of her. So I'll definitely be looking out for her work in the future to see what else she can do outside of the show here, because I thought what she did in the show was nothing short of amazing, in my opinion. But the one thing I want to point out about these two characters is that because they're so opposite of each other in terms of personality, one is the character of Amanda is very, it's kind of roguish, very blunt, and very rebellious in a lot of ways, especially when you learn about what exactly she had done to serve 10 years in prison. It's a very complicated story in that respect as well too. So you definitely need to have a strong performer to be able to deliver the various emotional beats that's required for this character, and sometimes some of the more comedic elements that comes with this character as well too, which I thought she did fantastic in the show. But when you understand how different they are in terms of personality, but they have a very common thing where these accusations that they're as far as what these acts they're accused of committing here, they understand each other in that respect, but they don't trust each other. But as the story progresses along the way, they start to learn to respect each other and also earn each other's respect along the way, and learn to trust each other as individuals as the story progresses. And you have the time to develop that relationship where you get to see that their partnership works very well together there for them to solve this crime that the wife of this Korean tech man who gets murdered in the show. You see how well they work with each other despite all these constant hurdles that they have to overcome along the way, that there's no way that anyone else could work together in that capacity and get the job done, despite these huge flaws that they have as individuals that you get to see along the way. That I got to give them a lot of props for that. It's something that I thought was extremely impressive in taking the time to spend with these characters in that respect. One other thing I want to point out too is the rest of the supporting cast here. Unfortunately, I'm not going to name everybody here, but when it came to a detective who's in that town that is very much has a grudge against the character of Amanda, you learn a lot about him as well too as the story progresses. And again, there's a lot of dark complexities about these characters that all these performers, the actors, meant to say, deliver some strong performances. And there's not a single actor in this movie that does a phoned in performance. Like, everyone, in my opinion, does their absolute best to deliver the best performance for the show, and it shows all the way through from start to finish, in my opinion. One other thing I want to point out too about the show that I thought was very, very effective is the environment. Again, Queensland is the northern parts of Australia, is a pretty hard place to live from what I'm understanding here. And although there are some beautiful areas in that part of the country where you get to see a lot of that in the show, but you also get to see some of the more isolated areas of that part of the area that the stories take place at, where you get to see why it's very difficult to live in that part of the country that most people would want to stay away from because it's too uncomfortable. And you get to see a lot of that in this show too. So there's certainly a wonderful aspect about the show where you get to see the environment just sink in as you watch along the way, and you get to see the beautiful side of it, but you also get to see some of the more horrific side of it as well too. And that if you are not aware of your surroundings, it could eat you alive, because there's a lot of things out there in terms of animals, that the crocodiles, the alligators, the spiders, and among other things as well too, that could literally kill you if you're not careful of where you're stepping on, what you're getting yourself into. So there's a whole lot about that. I think that the show, I think, does a really good job in showcasing that, and why it's extremely important as that part of the country is a very integral part to the story here. I also want to give props to all the directors that had taken part on the show here, where I believe they've done a really good job in giving the show a really, it's a nice balance, in my opinion, especially with the cinematographers too. So the directors and cinematographers I want to give a shout out to of the show. They've done a really good job in balancing out and giving it a certain brightness to the show that I thought worked very effectively. But when it's gloomy and dark, they've done a really good job in showcasing the dark atmosphere that this Queensland backdrop also has, which has a lot of, in some ways, kind of like a horror element to it. It's not a horror show by any means, but the atmosphere, you definitely do feel the atmosphere, especially when it comes to the night scenes, where you feel how dangerous it could be. And sometimes it does have to do with just the actions that certain people are going to be committing. That certainly does add on to that element as well too, with the backdrop and all. So I think everyone, as far as the directors and the cinematographers are concerned, they've done a really good job in showcasing a lot of those environmental elements and letting that be a character along the way too, to help fit the mood in telling and showcasing the beautiful side of the country, or at least a part of the town, I should say, and the darkness and the dangerous aspect of it as well too. So I thought in that respect they did a really good job. One thing I do want to point out to kind of close out with my positives here is that the story, without getting into spoilers here, there is so much that goes on with the show that I believe, the 8 episodes that we get with the show does warrant the time that you need to spend time with the characters, to have the story flesh itself out further and further. And as you spend time with certain characters and learn about their backstory, there are other things that are occurring along the way too that is not distracting or doesn't interfere with everything else that's going on as well. So I think in terms of what we get with the story here, they've done a really good job in showcasing what's really important to focus on first, on top of everything else that's going on there, which we do have time to flesh out as the story progresses along the way. I forgot to mention earlier that this is actually based on a book called Crimson Lake, which is a very successful best-selling novel written by the author Candace Fox. And I do know that there's 3 books in that book series, that I know that with the announcement of them doing a season 2, that they're going to be focusing on the second book, if I recall correctly. So considering how this show ended here, without really getting into some spoilers here, because there's a lot of things about the backstory that you start to see unravel on the way that closes out that story in this first season here. I'm extremely excited to see how this will be carrying on in the second season here, because it's all about the story, and it's all about the actors who put on a really good, strong performance here. And this show, in my opinion, does that in spades. But for me, that's going to be the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. So my first negative for me, it's kind of hard because I have to watch the show again to really make sure that the negative I have about the show, I wouldn't say is legitimate, but if it makes sense for me. So what I mean by that is this: there are certain story beats that you follow here in the show that does work, but I never really felt the impact, if that makes any sense, as far as certain characters that are introduced with the story that I remember thinking, was their involvement necessary? Because if it could be worked out another way to handle that side of the story, maybe it could have worked a little bit better. But I had to go back and watch the show again to really make sure that if that thought process that I had in my initial first viewing, if it holds up in that respect. I hope that makes sense here. The other thing I was really concerned about, that I was loving how the show was progressing along the way, where you get to learn more and more set of events that are occurring that were introduced in certain parts of the show, and then it was delved into further and further as the story progresses. The big concern that I had was the way the show had ended. Without revealing anything, I thought the way that it ended was handled rather well. But there's a certain story that gets revealed in that last episode that we know what happens to a certain character, but honestly, I want to see a little bit more of that fleshed out a little bit further, so we have a proper closure, at least a visual about what had happened after the events that we had seen of what had happened with that character. It's hard for me to explain without spoiling anything for you, but there are just certain things that occurred that I really love where the story was going, and it made sense. Some ways that it was handled I wouldn't say didn't work for me. It did work, but didn't work as well as I thought it would, if that makes any sense. It's kind of hard for me to explain without really getting into spoilers here, but I'm sure if you watch the show, you may understand what I'm talking about here, because the ending still worked. I still loved it, but I felt like it could have been fleshed out a little bit further. Maybe if the episode was more than an hour long, it probably could have worked a little bit better in that respect. So I thought more time could actually help out with the closure of this first season here. But overall, I still enjoyed it, but that was more or less a sticking point here for me. I'm not saying the show was absolutely perfect. There's a lot of things that I thought could have been done a little bit better, but those are just little nitpicks for me, because the overall story, the performances, everything about the show was so good, in my opinion, that I was able to overlook those flaws. If that, I hope not, I don't sound pretentious when I say this here, but I was able to overlook that. And I enjoyed the show a great deal because everything else was so good, in my opinion. But for me, that's going to be into my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. I do love this show. I think this is a very good show. I'm sure that there are going to be some people who will watch the show and probably not click with it right away. I do believe this is one of those shows that you have to just sit through and watch as certain stories progress along the way for you to really connect with certain characters. For me personally, I was already invested because I love Thomas Jane. I think he's one of the greatest actors in my opinion, and I love him as far as the films and shows he's are concerned. So for him to be taking on this project here, where we really get to see a deep complexity about this character, with these accusations that are made of him that could ruin everyone's life, and how the character deals with that, and you need someone that can do the character justice in that respect and yet still side with him, because to some degree you may not really be so sure if you truly believe him, although I believe what he's saying is about these accusations not being true, not because I'm a fan of him, but understanding the circumstance, understanding his behavior, understanding how he handles himself in certain situations. It doesn't ring to be true about these accusations that are being made about him when you get to learn about his background in the story. So you definitely need somebody that can do the character justice in that respect, because following this character's story and the accusation that's hovering over him is some really dark stuff, in my opinion, that no one wants hang over them. So Thomas Jane, in my opinion, did a really good job in showcasing that, where it's a fine line that you have to find a way how to deal with a character like that and understand what their perspective is and how they're going to more like go about it. So, you know, I can go on and on about his performance in that show, because I think he was amazing in this show here. And he's also one of the producers of the show as well, too, through his production company, which I believe is Renegade Productions, if I recall correctly. And the fact that there's going to be a season 2, I'm all in on that. I hope we get to see that here in the States sometime next year, because this show is actually going to be airing this week on May 20th on Freevee, which is for free. So that's not a pun. That's an actual thing. It's a Freevee is the name of the platform, and you can check it out there for free when it drops on May 20th. So for me, as much as I love the show, I do believe that there's going to be an audience out there that will connect with it, but I also believe that there are going to be some audiences out there that are going to probably take a little while to get used to the pace of the story here, because not to say it's running slow, but there are certain moments where you do get some time to spend with the characters, but you actually have the time to do so. And I think that might be a point where certain audience may watch the show and may think, come on, let's move the pace here. And I think that might be the case for certain people. But despite that, I think everything else about the show is so strong that I think some people will still be captivated and be invested to follow through with the story and hopefully see it to the very end. So for me, I'd say this show is going to be a solid cheers. And those are my thoughts on the show. And as I mentioned before, the show will be dropping this week on May 20th on Freevee, so make sure you guys check it out. And if you have seen the show, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, share, like our videos, and hit the notification bell while you're down there. Follow us on our social media accounts on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter @TheNRW. Follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram and Twitter, Mr. Rob Medina, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and I have a social media for the show as well. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And I want to thank you all very much for checking out this review. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, stay safe out there, and cheers.